Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association. Missouri produces wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details on the variety of products made in the state are at choosewood.com.
From the St. Louis Public Radio Newsroom, this is The Gateway. It's Monday, January 4th. I'm Wayne Pratt. More people than ever in the St. Louis region cast ballots before Election Day as governments were forced to expand early voting options during the pandemic.
Early voting has historically increased over the elections, getting more and more popular because it's just so darn convenient.
But the rules allowing people to easily vote early in the region expired January 1st. We will examine the future of early voting in Missouri and Illinois. Cori Bush is officially the Congresswoman for Missouri's 1st District. The St. Louis County Democrat took the oath of office yesterday. As St. Louis Public Radio's Jason Rosenbaum reports, the Congresswoman, who represents a big chunk of the region, is focusing on police accountability measures.
There are a host of reasons why Bush's swearing in as the 1st Congressional District Congresswoman is significant. She's the first black woman ever to represent Missouri in Congress, and she's part of a progressive bloc that could have a big impact on influencing legislation. But Bush is hoping her experience as a frontline protester after the shooting death of Michael Brown in Ferguson will move the needle on policing policy.
When you have that actual lived experience, when you can speak about it from the standpoint of I was there versus I heard about what happened, you are able to inform legislation differently.
Bush was appointed to serve on the House Judiciary Committee, which often hears bills dealing with law enforcement issues. I'm Jason Rosenbaum, St. Louis Public Radio.
Indoor dining resumes today at restaurants in St. Louis County. It has been prohibited since mid-November to help slow the spread of coronavirus. The battle against the virus is prompting hospital leaders in St. Louis to rely on more temporary workers. Many facilities were dealing with a healthcare worker shortage before the pandemic. Hospitals are now creating temporary positions and relying on travel nurses. Cynthia Benson Mercer is Executive Vice President of Mercy Health and says the system's St. Louis area hospitals are hiring about 80 temporary workers.
We couldn't miraculously create more nurses or care team members. We could help them by providing them extra hands and feet.
Half the workers will be licensed health staff. Others will help with tasks including stocking supplies and answering phones. A Missouri Republican lawmaker has pre-filed a constitutional amendment to legalize recreational marijuana in the state. He says he's the first in the majority party to do so. St. Louis Public Radio's Jacqueline Driscoll has more.
Shamed Dogan, a Republican from Baldwin, says his proposal does a lot more than just allowing adults to use cannabis recreationally.
It expunges the records of people who've been convicted of nonviolent marijuana offenses and has anyone who's incarcerated for nonviolent marijuana offenses be immediately released from prison.
Dogan says he also doesn't want to make the same mistakes that Missouri is seeing with its medical cannabis program, particularly capping the number of people who can grow or sell the drug. He wants less bureaucracy and doesn't want the state to regulate it. He wants it left up to local municipalities. His proposal would tax the drug at 12% and would require it be properly tested and labeled. In Jefferson City, I'm Jacqueline Driscoll, St. Louis Public Radio.
A record number of people throughout the region voted early in the 2020 general election. Illinois and Missouri made it easier to vote because of the pandemic, but now we're in a new year with new rules. St. Louis Public Radio's Kayla Drake and Eric Schmid report on the future of early voting in the region.
The coronavirus fundamentally changed how we voted in 2020.
Election days usually mean long lines and crowded precincts, but the pandemic twisted those norms into tangible health threats. State legislatures across the country rushed to add new ways for people to safely cast a ballot. Missouri added a first-ever vote-by-mail option and a new excuse for absentee voting.
Illinois sent vote-by-mail applications to everyone who had voted in any election since 2018. These changes led to a record number of people in both states who cast their ballots before November 3rd.
Nearly 1/3 of Missourians and 2/3 of Illinois residents had already voted by Election Day. Illinois has had excuse-free early voting since 2010, but many residents discover the options for the first time this election.
The big question now is what happens next? Was 2020 an anomaly because of the pandemic, or is this the beginning of a long-term shift toward voting early? Deborah Elmore from Collinsville has her answer. 2020 was the first time she ever voted by mail. She says she liked the option so much, it's how she wants to vote in every election.
It was the most educated voting I'd ever done, to be honest, because there's always a judge or something that I didn't know was on the ballot. Normally, if I would have been in the ballot box, I would have left it blank.
We heard from others who voted early, but we're unsure if they'll continue to do so.
But some people are committed to voting in person on Election Day. Steve Henderson, who lives in Wildwood, is one of them.
I don't want to go through all this and find out that my name was in the trash bin and never got counted. I mean, why do that? I wouldn't miss this at all unless I was in the bed and couldn't get out.
Regardless of preference, where you live will determine whether you have easy access to early voting in the future. Illinois and Missouri altered their voting rules on an emergency basis because of the pandemic. Those changes expired January 1st.
In Illinois, residents can continue to vote early without providing an excuse, something they've been able to do since 2010. Madison County has seen consistent increases since then, says County Clerk Debbie Ming Mendoza.
Early voting has historically increased over the elections, getting more and more popular because it's just so darn convenient.
Just over half the ballots in Madison and St. Clair counties were cast early in 2020. This year, Missouri goes back to its old absentee voting system. Any immediate changes would come from Jefferson City. But let's face it, politicians are divided right along party lines.
Democrats usually favor expansions, saying early voting makes casting a ballot easier. Republicans tend to oppose them, saying voting early can make elections less secure. Brian Gaines, a political science professor at the University of Illinois, says this partisan divide isn't new.
It isn't just this election cycle. It's emerged over maybe the last 15, 20 years.
This divide is mostly confined to politicians, not regular voters. Anita Mannion is a political science professor at the University of Missouri St. Louis. She says mail-in votes don't usually break for one party.
It did happen in this election, but that was because of the way that it was discouraged by the president and encouraged by Democrats. So I think, in another 2 or 4 years, if that rhetoric sort of dissipates, you'll see a return to a time when mail-in ballots don't disproportionately benefit either party.
Missouri election officials think it's time for excuse-free absentee voting. Eric Fay, Democratic Director of Elections for St. Louis County, says residents often skirt the rules anyway by randomly choosing an excuse. Fay says 2021 would be Missouri's best shot at changing its election rules.
I don't know that I hold out a lot of hope, but if there's any chance, it should probably be this session because, it's front of everybody's mind after the presidential election.
And there's some appetite for change across party lines. Missouri Secretary of State Republican Jay Ashcroft told St. Louis Public Radio he is willing to expand in-person absentee voting, but not voting by mail.
Democrats in the legislature plan to bring forward bills to expand voting options this session, which starts January 6th. But for now, how you can cast a ballot will depend on which side of the river you live on. I'm Eric Schmid.
And I'm Kayla Drake, St. Louis Public Radio.
Our Brian Heffernan and Shula Newman edited that report. Shula is the executive editor of St. Louis Public Radio. Music by Ryan McNeely of Adult Fur. I'm Wayne Pratt. From the St. Louis Public Radio newsroom, this has been The Gateway.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association. Missouri produces wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details on the variety of products made in the state are at choosewood.com.